Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The sky over Austin was gray, the kind that felt heavy, as if the clouds were holding back something more than rain. Mark Davis walked along the slick sidewalk, his backpack soaked through, his shoes squeaking with every step. 23 years old, a law student by day, a delivery driver by night, and a son to a sick mother who could not afford another round of treatment. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he almost ignored it, assuming it was another payment reminder. But the voice that came through was calm, almost commanding. "Mr. Davis," the woman said, "this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you regarding your financial situation." Mark stopped in his tracks, staring at the rain sliding down a lamppost. "I am sorry, who did you say you are?" he asked, his voice unsure. "You will understand soon," she replied. "Meet me at Brooks' Bistro at 7. It is important." Then the line went dead. Mark stood there for a long moment, the phone pressed against his ear, listening to nothing but the sound of the rain. He had no idea who she was, but something in her tone, quiet authority mixed with curiosity, made him go. At 7 sharp, he pushed open the door of the bistro. The place smelled of roasted coffee and old money. Soft jazz played from unseen speakers. At the far corner, a woman in her 70s sat perfectly upright, her silver hair pinned back, her tailored navy suit immaculate. When she saw him, she smiled just slightly. "Mark Davis," she greeted. "Please, sit." He hesitated before taking the seat across from her. "You said this was about my finances," he began cautiously. She lifted her teacup, her diamond ring catching the light. "Yes. I know about your father's debts, your mother's hospital bills, and your student loans. You are drowning, Mr. Davis. I am here to offer you a way out." Mark frowned, unsure whether to feel offended or grateful. "How do you know all this?" "I make it my business to know," she replied evenly. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and said, "Marry me." The words landed between them like a glass shattering. Mark blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" Eleanor Brooks did not blink. "You heard me. This is not about love. It is a contract. I need a husband for legal reasons. In exchange, I will pay off your debts, your mother's care, and guarantee your future." The cafe seemed to go silent, even the rain paused outside. Mark could not find words. "Why me?" he finally asked. She smiled faintly. "Because you have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. You are honest, discreet, and desperate enough to agree." Mark stood abruptly, the chair scraping the tile. "This is insane," he muttered. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," she replied. Her voice softened for the first time. "You remind me of someone who once believed in duty more than desire." He turned to leave, but her final words stopped him cold. "Think about it, Mark. Sometimes, a transaction can change your fate." Outside, the rain fell harder, drenching him as he walked home. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, a stranger asking him to marry her. But that night, staring at the medical bills stacked on the table beside his mother's worn couch, he realized that maybe insanity was just another name for survival. The next morning, the rain had not stopped, but the city looked softer under its gray veil. Mark had barely slept. He kept hearing her voice in his head, calm and deliberate, like the click of a pen signing away a life. "Marry me," she had said. It was ridiculous. Yet every number on the stack of bills reminded him why it was not. By noon, his mother coughed so hard that the spoon slipped from her hand. "You are working too much," she whispered, but Mark only smiled, pretending everything was fine. Later that night, after she fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table staring at a single envelope addressed to him past due notice. His reflection stared back from the window, tired and cornered. When his phone buzzed again, the same voice returned. "Have you made your decision?" Eleanor Brooks did not sound like a woman who heard no very often. Mark hesitated, staring at the photo of his mother on the fridge, her smile faded but kind. "Yes," he said quietly, "I will do it." Her reply came instantly. "Good. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Brooks Bistro. Wear a suit." The line went dead again. The next morning, he borrowed his only jacket from the dry cleaner where he worked part-time. It was too tight across the shoulders, but it made him look less like someone who lived on instant noodles and worry. The sky cleared just enough for a weak ray of sunlight to hit the cafe window when he arrived. Eleanor was already there, sipping tea with perfect posture. She gestured for him to sit. "You have decided wisely," she said. He exhaled slowly. "I am still not sure what exactly you expect from me." She slid a sleek folder across the table. "You will be my husband for a period of 6 months. There will be rules." Inside the folder, he saw pages of legal terms: confidentiality, non-disclosure, property rights, media conduct. She tapped the final page. "At the end of the term, we will annul the marriage. You will receive the payment listed here, and every debt tied to your name will be erased." Mark's throat went dry as he read the number. It was more than he would make in 10 years. "Why me?" he asked again, his voice rough. Eleanor's gaze softened for the first time. "Because you are honest. I had you checked, Mr. Davis. You do not lie, and you do not break promises. That is all I need." He leaned back, trying to steady his breathing. "And what will people say?" "You are 71. I am 23. "People already say things," she replied calmly. "Their opinions do not affect my legacy." She opened a small leather box and placed a simple silver ring inside. "You will need this tomorrow." He stared at it, the way light caught on the polished band. "Tomorrow?" "The ceremony will be private," she said. "No guests, no press. Just a signature. You can walk away anytime before that." Mark looked at her, searching for a crack in the armor, some sign this was a joke or a test. There was none. "If I say yes, now," he murmured, "then my life belongs to a stranger." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then let us hope that stranger keeps her word." He left the bistro with the folder pressed to his chest, the ring box heavy in his pocket. The world felt strangely quiet, like everything was holding its breath. That night, his mother noticed the ring when he set his jacket down. "Is that?" she asked softly. Mark nodded. "It is complicated, Mom." She smiled, weary but trusting. Sometimes complicated is the only way forward. He sat beside her, holding her hand as the old clock ticked between them. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and the city lights shimmered against the wet streets, waiting for whatever came next. The courthouse was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of old paper and rain. Mark adjusted his collar, feeling the suit Eleanor had provided cling too tightly around his neck. Beside him, she stood poised and graceful, a vision of composure that could silence an entire room. The officiant cleared his throat, flipping through the documents with the indifference of someone who had seen hundreds of marriages like this one. "Do you, Mark Davis, take Eleanor Brooks as your lawfully wedded wife?" Mark hesitated for a heartbeat too long. He glanced at Eleanor. Her expression did not change, her eyes remained steady, expectant but not warm. "I do," he said finally. The words felt strange, foreign, heavy on his tongue. "And do you, Eleanor Brooks, take Mark Davis to be your husband?" "I do," she replied with the calm certainty of signing another business deal. The officiant smiled politely. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The sound of the pen scratching against paper sealed their fate. Eleanor turned to him, extending her hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis." He managed a faint nod. Outside, the drizzle returned, painting the marble steps in silver streaks. As they stepped into the waiting car, Mark caught his reflection in the tinted window, a young man dressed in another world's clothes, bound to a life he did not recognize. The drive to her estate was silent. Miles of manicured lawns stretched before a mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Tall white columns, marble statues, and a fountain shaped like an angel frozen mid-flight. The gates opened slowly, groaning under their own weight. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and polish. "You will have your own room," Eleanor said as they entered the grand foyer. "Dinner is served at 7. I expect punctuality." Her tone was polite but absolute. A housekeeper appeared and led Mark upstairs. His room was larger than his entire apartment, furnished with antiques that looked too valuable to touch. He dropped his suitcase on the bed and stood there, staring at the chandelier that glittered like a constellation out of reach. At 7 sharp, he descended the sweeping staircase. Eleanor was already seated at the far end of the dining table, dressed in ivory silk, her posture perfect. The table stretched between them like a mile of polished wood. The meal looked exquisite: steak, asparagus, and red wine, but Mark could barely taste it. "You do not have to look so tense," she said finally, slicing her steak with precise, almost mechanical movements. "This arrangement is purely formal. All I ask is that you attend the events listed in your contract, maintain appearances, and do not embarrass me." "And after 6 months?" he asked quietly. "After 6 months," she replied, meeting his gaze, "we both walk away. Debt-free for you. Dignity intact for me." He nodded slowly. "Why is dignity so important to you?" Eleanor set her fork down, her eyes turning distant. "Because when you spend a lifetime building an empire, the only thing that cannot be bought back is respect." Her voice carried a weight that made Mark sit back in silence. After dinner, she rose first, her chair barely making a sound. "Good night, Mr. Davis," she said before disappearing up the marble stairs. Mark remained seated for a long while, staring at the half-empty glass of wine in front of him. Outside, thunder rolled far away, low and slow. He thought about his mother's small smile, her words, "Sometimes complicated is the only way forward." Maybe she had been right. He stood, loosened his tie, and wandered to the balcony overlooking the gardens. The air smelled of wet earth and roses. Somewhere below, a night bird called once, then fell silent. For the first time in his life, Mark Davis was both safe and completely lost. Days passed in a rhythm that felt like someone else's life. Each morning, Mark woke to the sound of distant footsteps echoing down the marble halls. Breakfast was served in silence, always by the same housekeeper, always with Eleanor already reading the newspaper as if he were invisible. Their lives ran parallel, two strangers under the same roof. Yet small moments began to break through the distance. One morning, as he walked past the library, he saw her sitting by the window, not with her tablet or a file of contracts, but with an old vinyl record turning slowly on a gramophone. The soft crackle of jazz filled the air. She looked up, surprised, and for a second, the mask of the millionaire woman slipped. "You like music from before your time," he said. She smiled faintly. "It is not about time. It is about memory." That was the first real conversation they had. That evening, at dinner, she asked about his mother. Mark told her quietly about the stroke, the treatments, the small apartment downtown. "She raised you alone?" Eleanor asked. "Yes. My father left when I was 15. She worked 3 jobs to keep me in school." "A strong woman," Eleanor said softly, as if speaking to herself. "You remind me of her." The next morning, Mark found a sealed envelope on his desk. Inside was a letter from the hospital. His mother's remaining balance had been paid in full. No signature, but he knew who had done it. When he went to thank her, Eleanor stopped him with a single look. "Do not thank me," she said. "It is part of the arrangement." But her tone was not cold, it carried something quieter, almost protective. The following week, she invited him to a charity gala, one of the events listed in their contract. "You will need a tuxedo," she said. "It is already arranged." Mark felt like a man being dressed for a role he had never auditioned for. That night, the mansion came alive with staff and preparation. Eleanor appeared at the top of the staircase, wearing a navy gown that shimmered like starlight. Every eye turned toward her, even Mark's breath caught for a moment. She noticed, just barely. "You clean up well," she said, offering her arm. The gala was held in a downtown ballroom, all gold light and crystal chandeliers. Eleanor moved through the crowd like she belonged to another world, smiling, shaking hands, her presence commanding every glance. Mark stayed close, speaking when necessary, nodding when unsure. When a reporter asked how they met, Eleanor answered smoothly, "It was unexpected, but some meetings are meant to happen." Her hand brushed his arm as she said it, and for the first time, it did not feel like an act. Later, as they stepped out to the terrace for air, she looked at the skyline and said quietly, "They believe what they need to believe. That is how reputation works." Mark turned toward her. "And what about what is real?" Eleanor looked at him, her blue eyes reflecting the city lights. "Real is a luxury, Mr. Davis. One most people cannot afford." Before he could reply, thunder rumbled over the horizon. She glanced upward, her expression unreadable. "Let us go before the rain starts." Back in the car, the city lights blurred against the wet windshield. Mark watched her reflection in the glass, elegant, composed, but distant, as if she were trapped behind it. When they returned home, Eleanor paused by the stairs. "You handled yourself well tonight," she said softly. "Thank you." He nodded, and for a moment, neither moved. There was something fragile in the silence between them, something that neither contract nor rule could explain. "Good night, Eleanor," he said finally. She hesitated before answering, "Good night, Mark." Upstairs, as he removed the tuxedo jacket, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The young man who had walked into the courthouse days ago was gone. What stared back now was someone in between, half of himself, half of her world. And outside, the rain returned, steady and endless, like the sound of a promise neither of them had meant to make. The days after the gala felt different. The house no longer seemed as silent, as though some unseen curtain had been drawn back just enough to let the world in. Eleanor still kept her distance, but her voice had softened, her gaze lingered longer when they crossed paths. Mark started joining her for coffee in the morning, both of them seated at opposite ends of the same table, the silence between them less heavy now, almost comfortable. One morning, she handed him a newspaper folded neatly to the business section. "You should read this," she said. It was an article about a foundation she had started years ago, one that provided scholarships for underprivileged students. "Why did you stop?" he asked. She looked away. People stopped believing it was for charity. They thought it was for image. He studied her for a moment and said, then started again. "Let them think whatever they want." For the first time, she smiled a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Later that afternoon, she asked him to accompany her to the city. "It is a business luncheon," she said, "but appearances matter." At the restaurant, filled with polished marble and crystal glasses, Eleanor's former business partner greeted her with a thin smile. "Mrs. Brooks," he said loudly, eyeing Mark. "And this must be your companion?" Mark extended his hand politely. "Husband," he corrected, his tone even but firm. The man blinked, taken aback. Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest hint of pride. "Yes," she said. "My husband." After that, she treated Mark differently, not as an accessory to her reputation, but as an ally in something larger. That night, as they rode home, the city lights flickered across her face. "You did not have to say that," she murmured. "It was the truth," he replied. "At least for now." She turned toward the window, but he could see the edge of her smile reflected in the glass. The next morning, Eleanor found him in the garden, sleeves rolled up, repairing one of the old benches. You do not need to do that, she said. I know, he replied, brushing off sawdust. But I like making things work again. She looked at him for a long moment before saying softly, so did I, once. That evening, she invited him to her study. On the desk lay an open ledger filled with notes and signatures. This was my husband's, she said. He built Brooks Enterprises from nothing. When he passed, I took over, but people said I was too old, too cold, too much of everything they feared in a woman with power. I suppose this marriage was my way of proving I still controlled my own story. Mark listened quietly. And are you, he asked, controlling it? She smiled sadly. Maybe not as much as I thought. For a long while, they said nothing. The clock ticked softly in the background, and the air between them shifted less contract, more confession. When he left the room, Eleanor stayed behind, staring at the silver ring on her finger. She touched it gently, as if realizing it had begun to mean something it was never meant to. Later that night, thunder rolled again, closer this time. Mark stood by his window, watching lightning flash across the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, a soft melody played the same old jazz from her record player. Without thinking, he followed the sound down the hall. The door to the library was slightly open, and Eleanor sat inside, her eyes closed, humming quietly. She looked up when she felt his presence. Could not sleep, she asked. No, he said, stepping closer. You? Same. The music filled the silence, gentle and haunting. Mark hesitated, then said softly, it is strange. When I first came here, this place felt like a museum. Now it feels alive. Eleanor met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you brought it back to life. For a moment, neither moved. Then, as thunder rumbled once more, Mark smiled faintly. Good night, Eleanor. She nodded, her voice almost tender. Good night, Mark. When he returned to his room, he realized that somewhere between the contract and the quiet mornings, the lines between obligation and affection had started to blur and neither of them seemed ready to draw them back. Weeks passed, and the routine that once felt like a contract began to feel like a life. Mark started helping Eleanor manage the endless letters and documents that arrived daily at her office. Sometimes she would glance up from her desk to find him reading quietly across the room, the late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds in thin golden lines. One evening, while reviewing a list of charity donors, Eleanor pressed a hand to her temple. Mark noticed. You should rest, he said. I am fine, she replied, but her voice betrayed a tremor. He stood, gently taking the pen from her hand. You do not have to do everything alone. For a moment, she looked at him, really looked, and the distance that had defined them seemed to vanish. Old habits, she whispered. They die harder than people think. The next morning, she did not appear for breakfast. Concerned, Mark knocked on her door. When there was no answer, he entered and found her sitting by the window, a shawl around her shoulders, her complexion pale. Eleanor, he said softly, are you all right? She smiled faintly. Just tired. I have been feeling it more lately. My doctor calls it age. I call it time catching up. He knelt beside her. Let me call someone. She shook her head. Do not fuss. It will pass. But that afternoon, when she nearly fainted in the hallway, Mark caught her just in time. He called the family physician despite her protest. Hours later, after the examination, the doctor pulled Mark aside. She is stable, he said quietly, but she needs rest. She pushes herself too hard. Mark nodded, his chest tight. That night, he brought her tea and sat by her bedside as the rain whispered against the window. You should have told me, he said. Eleanor looked at him, her expression unreadable. I am not used to anyone worrying about me. Get used to it, he replied. She smiled faintly, closing her eyes. Bossy, she murmured. You are learning from me. In the following days, Mark stayed close. He managed her meetings, filtered her calls, and made sure she ate. The mansion that once felt hollow now carried the quiet rhythm of shared care. Sometimes, when she slept, he caught himself studying her face, the strength, the grace, the hint of vulnerability beneath all that control. One evening, as she recovered, Eleanor asked him to walk with her through the garden. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange and violet. "When my husband died," she said quietly, "I thought I had used up every part of my heart. That there was nothing left to give." She paused, looking up at the fading light. "But you remind me that feeling alive is not something that ends. It just hides until someone stirs it again." Mark met her eyes, his voice low. "Maybe that is what this was meant to be all along. Not a contract. A beginning." She stopped walking, the soft rustle of leaves filling the silence between them. "Do not say things you cannot take back, Mark," she said gently. "This arrangement was never meant to last." "Maybe not," he said, but neither was pretending. Her breath caught, the faintest trace of emotion flickering behind her calm exterior. Then, as if to shield herself, she changed the subject. "The foundation is reopening next month," she said briskly. "I want you to oversee the student scholarship program." "Me?" he asked. "You trust me with that?" "I do," she replied simply. "Do not make me regret it." That night, Mark sat in his room, staring at the silver ring on his hand. It had started as a symbol of debt, of obligation. Now it felt heavier, alive with meaning he could not define. Down the hall, in her study, Eleanor traced the same ring on her own finger, her eyes lingering on the window where his light still glowed. Neither of them knew what to call what was growing between them. But for the first time, they both knew it was real. The morning after the foundation announcement, the calm that had settled over the Brooks estate shattered. A headline spread across every business page in the city: "Fake marriage scandal, widow CEO marries law student half her age." Mark found the newspaper already on the breakfast table when he walked in. Eleanor was sitting at the end, her teacup untouched, her expression carved in stone. "It seems the world has finally noticed," she said quietly. "Who leaked it?" he asked. She did not look up. "Someone with too much time and too little integrity. Likely a board member who wants me out." "Then let me face them with you," he said, his voice firm. "No," she replied. "The less you say, the better. They will turn you into a weapon against me." But by noon, the storm had already begun. Cameras crowded the front gates. Headlines questioned his motives, called him a gold digger, a fraud. Social media tore them apart. That afternoon, the board demanded an emergency meeting. Eleanor dressed in silence, her movements precise and deliberate. "You do not have to go alone," Mark said. She met his eyes. "I started this, Mark. I will end it." When she entered the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to cut. One director sneered, "We cannot have investors thinking this company is run by a woman buying herself a husband." Eleanor stood taller. "What I buy or do not buy is none of your concern. Brooks Enterprises stands because I built it. Not because of your gossip." But they pushed harder, waving headlines, threatening to vote her out. When she returned home that evening, the rain had begun again, steady and cold. Mark was waiting at the door. "What did they say?" "They gave me an ultimatum," she said, removing her gloves. "Step down quietly or face a public hearing." "You cannot let them do that," he said. "You do not understand," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "I built everything after my husband died. Every deal, every name on every building. And now it will all be reduced to a scandal about a ring." She turned away, but he caught her arm gently. "Then let me stand beside you. Let me prove this was never about money." "You cannot," she said, pulling her hand free. "You are part of the story now." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the air between them filled with everything they could not say. Finally, Eleanor stepped back. "Perhaps this is where the contract ends," she said softly. "For your sake, you should leave before it destroys you too." Mark's voice was quiet but steady. "I did not marry you for safety, Eleanor. I married you because I saw something in you worth fighting for." Her eyes glistened, but she turned away before he could see. When he left the room, the silence that followed felt heavier than the rain outside. Upstairs, Eleanor stood by the window, her reflection trembling against the glass. She pressed her hand against the ring on her finger and whispered, "What have I done?" Downstairs, Mark packed a small bag, not because he wanted to leave, but because he finally understood this was no longer a transaction. It was love, and love was the one thing neither of them had planned for. 2 days later, the public hearing was announced. Reporters filled the marble lobby of Brooks Enterprises, their cameras flashing as if the building itself were on trial. Mark watched the broadcast from his small apartment downtown, the one he had moved back to after leaving the mansion. On the screen, Eleanor walked through the crowd alone, her head high, her silver hair gleaming under the harsh lights. The board members sat like judges, papers stacked before them, microphones ready to turn her life into spectacle. One of them spoke first, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Brooks, the company's reputation has suffered. Investors question your decision-making. We need transparency. Was your marriage to Mr. Davis genuine or a calculated attempt to manipulate public sympathy?" Eleanor's expression did not waver. "My marriage," she said evenly, "was a personal decision. My work has never depended on anyone's approval but the shareholders, and they have been paid, in full, every quarter." Another board member leaned forward. "So you admit it was not real?" Before she could answer, the doors at the back of the room opened. Mark walked in, his heart pounding but his step steady. Gasps rippled through the audience as cameras turned. Eleanor's eyes widened, surprise and fear flickering across her face. "Mark," she whispered. He took the microphone. "You want the truth? Here it is. I did not marry Eleanor Brooks for money. I married her because she saw value in someone the world overlooked. And I stayed because I found someone worth believing in." Murmurs filled the room. One reporter called out, "So you are saying you love her?" Mark met Eleanor's eyes. "I am saying I respect her. And if that is love, then yes." Eleanor looked down, her composure breaking for the first time. A tear slipped down her cheek before she caught it with a trembling hand. The chairman cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular, so was she," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "Irregular, extraordinary, brilliant. She built this empire from the ground up when everyone told her she could not. You can take her title, her seat, but you will never take the respect she earned." The room went silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the younger board members said quietly, "Perhaps this meeting has gone far enough." By the time Eleanor left the building, the reporters' questions sounded different. They no longer asked about scandal. They asked about strength. That night, she returned home to find Mark waiting by the gate, his clothes still damp from the rain. "You should not have done that," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "You once told me respect cannot be bought. You earned mine the moment you refused to let them break you." She stood there for a moment, the rain blurring the distance between them. Then she stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "You ruined my plan, you know," she said, her voice breaking into a faint laugh. "Good," he whispered. "It was a terrible plan." For the first time since the day they met, she let herself lean into him. The rain soaked through their clothes, but neither moved. In that quiet, imperfect moment, everything false between them finally washed away. 6 months later, spring returned to Austin. The city felt lighter, washed clean by time. The headlines that once screamed scandal had faded into footnotes, replaced by stories about the Brooks Foundation's revival. The scholarship program had already funded dozens of students, and at the center of every article was the same picture: Eleanor Brooks and Mark Davis standing side by side, not as symbols of controversy but as proof that reputation can heal when truth stands firm. That morning, Eleanor walked through the garden that had once been Mark's favorite spot. Roses bloomed again where winter had stripped them bare. She paused by the bench he had repaired months earlier and smiled when she saw a small plaque he had added without telling her. It read, "Built to last, like promises kept." Behind her, footsteps approached. "You still have that habit of fixing things," she said softly. Mark laughed. "Only the ones worth keeping." He carried a small box in his hand, the kind that held more than it seemed. "The board wants you to know the vote was unanimous," he said. "They reinstated you completely." She nodded. "It is funny," she said, "for the first time in years, I am not sure I want the power back." Mark opened the box, revealing two simple silver rings, the same design they had worn before, but this time engraved with their initials. "Then maybe it is time for something that is not about power," he said quietly. She looked at the rings, her eyes shining with a warmth he had never seen before. "Are you proposing again?" He smiled. "Not a proposal. A renewal. No contract. No condition. Just choice." For a moment, she said nothing. The wind moved gently through the garden, stirring the petals around them. Finally, she took the ring and slipped it onto his hand. "Then I choose you," she whispered. "Not because I need you. Because I want you." He exhaled, a soft laugh escaping him. "That might be the first time anyone has ever said that to me." She smiled, the kind that carried both joy and peace. "Then you were overdue." They sat together on the bench, hand in hand, watching the sunlight spill across the fountain. The angel statue shimmered, its wings glistening with water. Mark looked at her and said, "You know, it started as a lie." "Maybe," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "But some lies are just truths waiting to be lived." From the distance, the sound of children's laughter drifted from the community center the foundation had rebuilt. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. She had spent her life chasing legacy, and now, in the quiet simplicity of the garden, she had found something greater: peace. Mark turned toward her and whispered, "For what it is worth, I would have said yes, even without the contract." She smiled, eyes still closed. "I know, that is why it was real." The camera of life pulled back, two figures on a bench, silver rings glinting in the sun, surrounded by everything they had built, not from power or wealth, but from love earned the hard way. And somewhere between the fading echoes of rain and laughter, their story finally came full circle.